A very good evening to you and welcome to the World Today on Channels Television. I'm Cynthia Are. We begin in Scotland, and voting there continues whether or not it will become independent of the United Kingdom. The turnout today has been high, as 97% of the electorate has been registered to cast their votes in 5,579 polling stations until 10 p.m. local time. Earlier today, a number of councils around the country said polling stations had been busy, some with long queues. Once polls have closed, ballot papers will be counted in each of Scotland's 32 local authority areas. When they are tallied, the counting officer in each area will then communicate the results to the chief counting officer, who will then, with her approval, make a declaration of the result by tomorrow morning. For more on the activities going on in Scotland, I'm being joined now by the Voice of America's Henry Ridgwell, who'll be talking to us from London. Henry, I hope you can hear and see us on the World Today. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening.
Thank you so much, Henry. Now, I'd like to start by asking you how the turnout of today's voting was.
We haven't got exact figures, but it looks very high. As you mentioned in your introduction there, 97% of eligible voters have registered to vote. That's about 4.2 million people. So it's expected to be the busiest polling day in Scotland's history. An extraordinary number of people registered to vote, and on an extraordinary day for the history and for the future of Scotland. There's 5,500 polling stations across the country. All of them report pretty brisk traffic throughout their doors, and some of these polling stations are in very remote places in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland, places like the Shetland Islands and the Orkney Islands, which are closer to Norway than they are to London, to give you an idea of the geography, the challenges that face this poll. The polls close at 10 o'clock local time this evening, and it's then that the earliest counts, about 3 hours later, the earliest counts will start coming in. We expect the first results about 1 a.m. Friday morning local time. It will take those further distant polling stations a longer time to get their votes into the central counting areas in Edinburgh and Glasgow and so on. The final result is expected at about 7 a.m. Friday morning, and no doubt millions of people across Scotland, across the UK, and of course across the world, great interest in this story globally, will be tuned in to get the result.
Well, Henry, since it's a really big, there's a really big electorate, how realistic is it to expect final results by tomorrow?
I think it is very realistic. It's a well-developed polling system they have. Of course, every 4 or 5 years, the United Kingdom, including Scotland, goes to the polls, and that's a very well-established system. The only potential snags, I suppose, in the system might be, firstly, a very close result, which is a distinct possibility, in which case some of the polling areas might demand recounts, or they might be very close and be forced to have recounts. Or secondly, if there's very bad weather and those distant polling stations in the islands of Orkney and Shetland, for example, may be delayed in getting their polling papers into the central places. But actually the weather forecast is pretty good at the moment. Pretty warm weather up in Scotland, which also influences the turnout for the vote. Historically, it's been shown that rainy, bad weather can reduce the turnout by about 20%. Today it's sunny, so they're expecting a big turnout.
So do you think London's efforts to sway the Scots has had any significant effect?
I think, yes, it has, but on both sides, if you like, a double-edged sword. London has warned the Scottish people that a yes vote, a vote for independence, would bring in all sorts of uncertainties. What currency would they use? How much debt would they have? Really, how would they sustain their economy without the booming economy of London, which really anchors the United Kingdom in the global financial system? Would they be members of the European Union? Would they be members of NATO? What about their security? What about their armed forces? London has been bringing up all these unknown questions and really saying that the status quo is better and stick with us. But I think for those who really were leaning already towards independence, people from London coming up and telling them, and what they call scaremongering them into voting no, maybe have the opposite effect and will galvanise their desire to be free from London's politicians, who they view as very distant and who they see as really not representing their interests at all.
Now, speaking of effects, what happens if the Scots vote yes? And what if they vote no? Will London hastily give them, new authority, just like they promised to?
I think when everybody wakes up on Friday morning and we hear the final result, there's going to be no easy answers, no easy future, really. Even if it's a no vote, those extra powers that you mentioned that the party leaders in London have promised Scotland won't be easy to implement either. There's a lot of lawmakers in London who are quite angry with their party leaders for offering so much to the Scottish people, really more than people in the rest of the United Kingdom enjoy. So, for example, Scottish students can get free university tuition, whereas people in the rest of the United Kingdom have to pay about 3,000 British pounds, 5,000 or so US dollars every year. The different charges for the NHS in Scotland, and more tax spending per person in Scotland. 1,600 British pounds more is spent per person in Scotland than the rest of the United Kingdom. So a lot of anger in London over that. It won't be easy even if there's a no vote. If there's a yes vote, well then, of course, that really sends shockwaves across the United Kingdom and across the world. And I think that the first effort, both in London and in Edinburgh, will be to try to prevent any panic on the financial markets, any runs on the bank, people withdrawing their cash because they're worried about its future, prevent massive capital flows out of Scotland, and try to limit any short-term damage to Scotland's financial and economic systems. Beyond that, it will be very complex negotiations between Edinburgh and London about the minutiae of this, what has been described as a sort of painful divorce. Who gets what? Who gets the assets? Who gets the family home, if you like? Who gets the money and the car and so on? So who gets those things like North Sea oil? Where would the borders be drawn? But also, how much debt would Scotland be laden with, and what other institutions would be shared or what would be divided? So after Friday, everything will change, whether it's a yes or no vote. The way that Britain is governed will be changed.
Well, Henry, thank you so much. As always, you've been a lot of help to us here on The World Today. I've been speaking with the Voice of America's Henry Ridgwell. He's been telling us about the vote in Scotland. Hopefully we'll get to speak to him again tomorrow when the final results are in. Thank you very much. Now, still talking about the Scottish independence. Scotland's independence might be considered an internal issue, but the rest of Europe is watching closely on how today's votes will turn out. The head of the EU delegation in Nigeria, Ambassador Arian, says if the Scots do become independent, it will take a long time before they are able to function as a democratic entity or become a part of the European Union if desired.
A basic question, do you want to stay united or not, or do you want to be independent or not? That's a basic thing. Huh? Other countries in Europe within the European Union have a kind of experience where some people would like, some independentist people want to create their own country in Spain, in Belgium. We had in the past the split of Czechoslovakia that finally ended in two different countries. Well, there are, of course, challenges and issues about, splitting a country. It's not an easy task. It's very difficult. It will not affect, it will affect us in the sense, I don't think there will be an economic shock on the European economy, but it will oblige us to be very innovative in terms of institutional arrangement, institutional setups, etc. Yes. Scotland will have to apply for a membership. The legal implications have not been assessed yet. The whole range of legal consequences and constitutional consequences have not been assessed by anyone, I would say. Nobody knows what will happen to a certain, what kind of law will apply, what will be the legal framework. Will take time for Scotland. Should there be one day an independent Scotland, it will take time to